Give the people what they want.
Welcome to Banking on Community, the podcast where we share stories, insight, and solutions shaping the future of local finance. I'm Saxon Prater, PR and Communications Manager here at CSI.
And I'm Tara Schultz, SVP of Strategic Insights and Industry Relations at CSI. I am very excited about our guest today, someone who I have the pleasure of picking her brain often and working with her on a variety of topics. Kate Drew, who leads the research wing of CCG, a boutique consulting firm serving the financial services sector. Kate, welcome to Banking on Community.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit more about you and your background and your focus at CCG. And for bonus points, toss in what you love to do for fun, besides, of course, writing with M-dashes and deep financial services research, because those don't count.
Well, like you said, I lead research at CCG Catalyst. We serve primarily community and regional banks, and we help our clients with everything from business and technology strategy through to the implementation of those strategies. And my job is really to stay on top of everything that's happening in banking, which is both fun and not easy, so that I can communicate that out to the market and to our clients, and help kind of keep everybody on top of what's going on. We work with a lot of community banks, like I mentioned, so I'm really excited to be here with you today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. For fun, I love to travel, and I love to eat, and my husband and I actually took a year to travel before we got married. We were on every continent except Antarctica, and we were gone for an entire year. And I have a 13-month-old now, and everybody told me that when he was born, good thing you did that when you could and all of that, but we're trying to do it with him. We just got back from Paris, so fingers crossed, he'll be a little travel buddy too.
I love that. So much fun. So much fun. So we were talking about the next topics for our discussion here on Banking on Community. And I think it'll be no surprise to our audience that all of our conversations and the data on what is absolutely top of mind for our listeners and they're seeking more information on, and that's AI. When you look back at our CSI Banking Priorities Survey, 83% were concerned about the potential of AI in banking. And 43% of respondents listed AI as one of the top 3 technology investment priorities, or really priorities for the year. Obviously, we've seen a multitude of big news on this front over just the last 24 hours, and that's kind of becoming a norm. So we've seen Anthropic releasing Claude for financial services and so many other things. So who better to pull in than someone I personally know has and is really deep researching this space, and you're guiding financial institutions in this space today around AI, around the hype, the real, the oops, the downsides, and the future. So Saxon, what do you say we dive in?
Yeah, I'm all for it. And Kate, again, welcome to the show. We talk a lot at kind of a very high level, more speculative angle on AI. It's something that Tara and I have actually talked about quite a bit, but I'm really excited for you to be able to kind of, you have dug into a lot of this, so you can give us a little bit more detail. So I'll kind of just start there on some of the research that you've done. We hear a lot about AI in the media, probably too much, honestly. Has anything surprised you as you're sort of digging into actual data?
I don't know if I would say it challenged my previous assumptions or truly surprised me. But one of the things that I have realized in exploring this space is that it is different from every other area that I cover when it comes to innovation in financial services. And that's because as consultants or technology providers or industry observers, we are often focused on areas of innovation that are specific to banking. So whether that's banking as a service or open banking, or fraud, even, developments in the fraud space, these are specific to banks, right? But what I found with AI that's really important is that this technology or portfolio of technologies represents an industry agnostic leap forward. So what does that mean? It means that we have to look at it really differently than we do all of these other areas of innovation, because it's not happening just within our industry. And I feel like that was really important for me in kind of, as I've been learning more, because I mean, truly, like, we're all learning, right? Like, even those of us that have built expertise in AI over the last few years, we're still learning. Even, those who are building Claude at Anthropic, those who are building OpenAI, these people are still learning too, right? Because this is very, very, very early. And I think one of the things that I have really come to realize is that we have to put this in the context of the wider world. And once you do that, you realize that we are in the prologue. This is very, very early. So the use cases that you're going to see might be a little bit boring in the beginning. It might be, your employees using Microsoft Copilot. That's okay. That's okay, because we are all at the beginning of this journey, not in banking, but as humans, right? No matter how that sounds, that's the truth of it, right? We are at the beginning of this journey as humans. So whether you're in banking or not, you really have to get comfortable with it on a personal level too, no matter what industry you work in. And so I think that's really the thing that kind of hit me the hardest, because it's just so different from all of the other areas that I talk about and all of the other areas that I've researched. And I'll give you another example of that. When we recently published a report on generative AI in banking. And normally when I'm doing research for my reports and I'm talking to technology providers in the space, so those who, have that expertise to be, building the future, they are not only wildly optimistic, but they believe that they can do anything. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And you really have to dig down to figure out, where we are exactly. The technology providers I interviewed for this report told me over and over again, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. And that is very different. It's very, very different from normally what I hear, which tells me that this entire movement is very different from anything that we've experienced in the past.
Yeah, I think you make a really important point about it being truly industry agnostic. It's simply about efficiency and effectiveness across the entire enterprise, no matter what type of enterprise that is. But the transformation opportunity is truly massive. And what I love about this, and it's been a bit surprising because you don't see this all the time, is some of the smallest financial institutions making big headway here. And I think it's really all about baby steps. Doesn't matter if they're 200 million or 10 billion. It's where they are willing to really start out with those small use cases. Like you said, boring, but really important. Procedure development, streamlining and speeding up those processes. They get a win, they celebrate that, and they move on to the next most pressing or repeated process within their bank or credit union. So that's a really, really important point about this being surprising impact industry-wide, but so far beyond that. But even the smallest players are jumping in and tackling the biggest problems that they have with this. So it's great to see. Let's dive into use cases and some of the use cases, some of the impact that you're seeing in the industry.
Well, it's funny. One of the things that you just mentioned was procedure development. And one of the banks I talked to for our recent report, Citizens First Bank, is doing exactly that. And I love this example for a few reasons. So the bank began using generative AI to write procedures. It took a process that used to take 1 to 2 hours down to 10 to 20 minutes. It's very straightforward. It was a very targeted decision to use this technology for this purpose. And like you said, it's small, right? But it has a big impact. And it made a really big impact for this particular team. And they did really well with it. And I think the reason that this is such a good example is because they didn't stop there. They used the learnings from that use case. First of all, they were applying the technology to a problem that they had, as opposed to looking for problems the technology could solve, which is always what you want to do. And then they use the learnings and successes from that instance to then go on and expand to different use cases. So now they're using it to summarize reports, for example, and they're starting to put together an AI steering committee so that they can explore other ways to use the technology. I mean, this is really the way to do it, right? Is you start small with a real problem, you get comfortable, you get your employees comfortable, and then you also get your employees trained. And then those employees can kind of act as ambassadors to go, especially in a small institution, to go through the bank and help train everybody else on how to use the technology and you know, act almost as champions, right, for the benefits. And you know, take some of the fear away, because whenever we talk about AI, there's always going to be excitement and fear at the same time, especially if you start talking about automating work. So really, like, it's not just about starting small, but it's about starting small and then allowing that to proliferate in really smart and strategic ways. So that's, you know, one great use case that I think really ties into a wider use case, which is content development, right? If we're talking about generative AI specifically, that's what it's really good at. It's really good at understanding human language and then producing content out of human language. So think marketing, development of procedures, things like that. Anything that you can kind of, you know, would take a long time to create, it's going to be very useful there. You're always going to need to have a human set of eyes on it, right? Because it's not ready for prime time. But we're seeing a lot happening in the content development space. Also, and I would put this under the content development umbrella, is training. There are a number of platforms out there that are using generative AI to help financial institutions consolidate their training tools, consolidate all of that material, and make it a lot easier to train up new employees. Another area, and this is tied closely to content development, is knowledge management. So we're seeing, I mentioned Copilot earlier, that's sort of like a basic use case, right? Like you can just train up all of your employees on Copilot and you've gotten started with AI. That's great, you're doing well. But taking that a step further, we're seeing some institutions begin to create these sort of supercharged intranets where they build their own sort of customized co-pilots that are fed the bank's data and then become, you know, very, very trained up. The chatbots essentially are trained up on the bank's data so that they can talk to employees and surface information specific to the bank and help employees move a lot faster. We call it, I usually call it a supercharged intranet because that's essentially what it is. It's a co-pilot that is specific to you. And then the third sort of big bucket that I would put this in that I would say we're not quite there yet, but we're going to get there, is customer service and anything that, you know, kind of touches customer interactions. And that's where everybody wants to go, right? Because other industries are going there really fast. But for now, if you're going to have any kind of external facing chatbot or any external interaction with users, usually there's going to be a human in the loop, but there's a ton of potential there too. And I've seen a number of community banks starting really small with that, where they are sort of using traditional AI tools. And we can talk about this a little bit too, if you want, sort of how to break down the different subsets of AI, but they're using traditional AI tools to create chatbots that will eventually lay the foundation later for when generative AI is ready.
You mentioned a supercharged intranet, and I bet that also indirectly helps with customer service too, because you could scan through a lot of your documentation and information a lot faster. Do these institutions have specific guardrails around what the generative AI is accessing so that it's just within their network and sort of existing ecosystem?
Yeah, that's really important. There are a couple of different ways that you can do this. One way is to essentially create a layer that prevents the original model, so say it's GPT-4, from being trained on any of the bank's data, right? So you're essentially abstracting away the original model. I think that's probably the most typical way. And then I've seen a couple of fintech providers actually that are offering financial services specific either knowledge management or essentially internal chatbot capabilities. Like they help you get up and running with that. Yeah. And the way that they do it is by deploying individual instances for each bank, so that your data is secure. But obviously, that's a major concern for anyone kind of getting involved in this space, and you really have to make sure that you have a strategy in place before you jump in, so that you know that you're doing it the right way.
I love that. So one additional point on your Citizens First example too, and you referenced an AI committee, and I think what they're doing really right there is they're aligning the entire organization and prioritizing problems as such across, so that, you know, not department by department, they're trying to fight their own fires and most important problems, but they're working as a team, they're working as aligned with limited resources to really prioritize those and not making it an IT problem, but really centering it around the business problems they need to focus on. So just wanted to double click on that a bit and ask you next. You know, we've talked a little bit about this in the past. Obviously, some of the space is real and some of it is still overrated and overhyped. So from a research perspective, how are you differentiating the real versus the hype?
I think about this a lot, and I would say I'm not sure real versus hype is how I would lay it out. I think it's more, I think of us as more on a timeline that we're progressing through. And I think where we kind of get stuck in the hype is when you see people on LinkedIn or companies talking about us being a lot further along on that timeline than we are. So I don't think it means that we're not going to get there, but we're not there yet. And so the way that I think about this today is that if you're talking about any kind of traditional machine learning or NLP, we're there, right? Those technologies are established in banking. You can use them, you can gain efficiency through them. If we talk about sort of the next phase in generative AI, there's a lot of opportunity there too. You know, like we were talking about before, internally, chatbots, content development, things like that, all real, all happening today. It's when we start to get into those more customer-facing use cases where you see people talking about using AI in loan underwriting or using forms of agentic AI to begin to make decisions for customers. That's where we start to kind of bleed into this hype cycle of it's very exciting and it will happen most likely, but we're just not there yet. And I think the reason for that is really the technology itself. And this is why I keep saying it's so important to remember that this technology is industry agnostic. Hallucination rates for LLMs are between 1% and 30%. That's a huge swing, right? So because of that, in highly regulated industries, putting that technology in front of a customer is extremely risky, and banks are risk averse. So today we're finding ways to do that with a human in the loop, right? So what I would say for community bankers who are interested in exploring this kind of technology for customer service is look for opportunities, tools that keep a human in the loop, and be very wary of anything that seems to promise the ability to, deploy anything agentic without that component. And you're probably not even going to be likely to see much of that, even if it's talked about, when you actually dig deeper, because even technology providers know that we can't be doing that right now.
Yeah, it's about augmenting, not replacing. And I think, one more bit of guidance is to stay really focused on the economic impact that tool is truly making for them, and have true KPIs around what they're achieving, with whether they're talking to a fintech that's leveraging AI to solve a problem or whether they're doing that with internal tools themselves. I think that's key, and probably something you discuss with financial institutions all the time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I hear a lot is this question of what's real and what's not. It's not like I'm not surprised by that question. I get it all the time. I think it's really more of a question of where we are on this journey, right? And we're just so early, right? So every time I open LinkedIn, I'm seeing infographics of AI agents in financial services. And it's when I see those infographics that I'm thinking to myself, yeah, this is hype. Not because it's not going to happen, but because it's so far down the path. And again, things are accelerating quickly, hopefully we will get there. But if you have, an LLM hallucinating even above 5%, you're going to struggle, as a financial institution to get comfortable putting that in front of customers. So that's where I would say, the greatest hype is probably around talking about, agentic and things that really combine machine learning with generative AI.
I think thinking about it like a timeline, that's a great way to put it. Like I'm now kind of visualizing it in a sort of continuum moving forward. What do you think realistically next couple of years, as these are getting more sophisticated, that banks are going to be able to do a little bit more easily that they're not already?
I think that one thing that we're going to see happen quite quickly and probably in the next year or so is bank employees starting to become much more proficient with AI and much more comfortable with it. And once that happens, we'll be able to do a lot more. And the reason for that is because if either of you use AI in your work or in your daily life, one of the things I'm sure you know is that you have to validate everything that it's giving you. Whether it's you're using a public LLM or whether it is one that's built internally, you still have to validate everything that it's giving you. And so the reason that you have to start with smaller use cases and ones that have good return, but still you have to start small, is because you have to train everybody on the technology to understand how to validate what they're getting. Once you're confident that your employees can do that effectively and really are comfortable doing that, then you can begin to use it for other things. You can begin to use it to assist agents in the call center, right? You can be able to use it to assist relationship managers in making recommendations with their clients. You can start to use it with customers. I mean, I wouldn't unleash it with customers probably in the next year or so. I think that's going to take a lot longer. But you can start using it in some of these ways that not only increase efficiencies, but also augment experiences.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I like that.
Me too.
So what are the biggest obstacles that really banks are facing when adopting generative AI technologies that you're seeing, experiencing, discussing with financial institutions today?
Education is a big one. I think understanding that AI is, you're going to be afraid of anything that you don't truly understand. I think the exciting, examples of community banks that we're talking about using this technology, it's because they approached it in a way that allowed them to get comfortable, right? Yeah. And they did the work to educate themselves. That's really, really important because you're going to be wary of it if you don't understand it, if you don't understand what the opportunities are, if you don't understand how to measure real risk around it, if you don't understand that you can start small. I think that is a huge obstacle. Again, not just for bankers, but for everyone. Understanding it is important. And when I say that, I mean, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, AI isn't one technology. It's a portfolio of technology. So you have established AI tools like NLP and machine learning, and then you have these newer tools like generative AI, right? And when we talk about agentic AI, that's essentially combining machine learning with generative AI. So we are, experiencing a major leap forward in the field of AI, which is why it feels like everybody is talking about it. But some of these technologies have existed for a really long time. It's important to understand that not only from a risk perspective, but also because, again, if you go back to your strategy and your problems, you don't want to be looking for ways to use AI. You want to be looking at your problems and your strategy and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve and making sure that you understand the tools out there in order to map the right tools to the right problem. So I think as long as you feel like you have a really good understanding, your leadership team and even your board have a really good understanding of, what the technologies that fall under this umbrella are and what they do, then when you are kind of working through those problems and solutioning, you'll be able to map the right solution to the right problem, similar to Citizens First Bank when they identified that they could use it for writing procedures.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about the explainability aspect. And I think as the use cases continue to evolve, I think the explainability of the very base use cases are key because you're understanding the technology and how it's deriving what it's giving you. But then when you look at the use cases expanding from a regulatory perspective, from a loan pricing or credit worthiness perspective, like that gets a lot riskier when you look at the explainability risks and the need to be able to explain that to a regulator. But I would also say, and I'm curious if you agree on this or disagree, but the data awareness aspect is key in having that complete and holistic data picture from a financial institution's perspective, from the access and the strategy, for that to all be foundation to provide the right insight and guidance and next best product recommendations. I feel like that's pretty foundational. And are you hearing that? Are you having the same conversations with financial institutions that have not yet really centered in on the data strategy itself prior to jumping into, more of the harder use cases leveraging AI?
Absolutely. I agree with you completely. I think that is also a huge obstacle for a lot of institutions, because you can get started with AI without doing that with some of these smaller use cases that we've been discussing. But as the whole space kind of evolves and as the industry adopts the technology, more deeply and everything becomes a little bit more integrated and you have more advanced use cases, you're going to need to get your data in order. And, we've been talking about this with clients for a long time, even before this, that having a good solid data foundation can enable you to do so many things because it provides you with insight. And that's really what you need to differentiate, right? I say this all the time that, all banks, especially community banks, they're about 90% the same and 10% different. And that 10% is so important because it is your secret sauce. And a lot of your secret sauce is probably in your data. So whether you plan to use the most advanced AI tools out there or not, or whether or not they solve your problems or not, having a really good understanding of everything that's happening within the bank and with your customers is going to help you. And I would if I could just maybe follow up on your question about obstacles, there's probably a couple of others that are worth discussing. I mean, we talked about hallucination. That's a big one. That's going to come down over time. And it's going to make more external use cases more achievable and accessible for financial institutions. But that is, something that needs to happen in the AI industry, in the field of AI, and not necessarily in the field of banking. And I think probably the other thing that is worth pointing out is just getting started. Like, it's so easy to get analysis paralysis around anything. And I think that can be a huge hurdle for any organization today thinking about this. So, if we could go back to kind of what we were talking about earlier around Copilot, just get started. Because the truth is that if you don't, chances are your employees are using AI tools, whether you know it or not, and you're not participating in how that's happening, right? So one of the first things that I usually tell banks that are asking me about this is, get an AI policy in place. That's just basic, 101. Get it in place so you have it. You can always iterate on it, but make sure at a base level you understand how your employees are using it, because then you will be able to participate in the benefits and you'll be able to mitigate a lot of the risk.
Can you give an example of what an AI policy might look like? Obviously, it's going to depend upon the bank or credit union, what have you, but what sorts of things would they include?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it really does depend. It can really start with just foundationally governing how employees are using AI tools at the bank. Also, it should govern how you expect vendors to use AI and how you manage third-party risk around that as well. And then, eventually kind of mapping out the rules of the road for your own AI use as a bank. But as you kind of grow in your strategic vision for AI and your business strategy, that policy is going to have to grow and evolve too.
Makes sense. Well, Kate, you've given us a lot to think about. Thank you for providing all of your insight and just expertise in this area. I'll give you kind of like a final word. Any other thing that you would like to say to community bankers, smaller financial institutions that are hoping to stay competitive? Would you have any final words, suggestions, advice, whatever it happens to be?
I mean, I think my advice is, and I'm going to sound like a broken record now, but it's get started. And look at the examples. The report that we published recently has a number of them in there. Look at the examples of other smaller institutions and what they're doing, because it will be inspiring to you. Their problems are going to be different from your problems, but just looking at sort of how they're thinking about it and how they're approaching it in really risk mitigated ways, I think could be hugely helpful. And again, like making sure that your employees know how they should be using the technology and, leveraging things like Copilot inside of Microsoft, like that's going to do so much to help the bank as a whole to, be ready for whatever the next wave is, which is probably coming sooner than we even realize. I think, that's probably like my biggest piece of advice. And then, to Tara's point earlier, once you have any kind of foundation in place, then you can start to really think about how you both at the same time tackle problems using the technology by department, but then bring the entire bank along with you for the journey. And I think thinking through how you connect those points as you get started and making sure that you have that in mind as you're getting started is going to be really important for building foundations for the future. Because this future, and even though I keep saying, we're in the prologue, we're moving quickly. So the future is probably coming before we know it.
I think that's so well stated. And looking at it from a small financial institution perspective, many may not have the foundational expertise or specialty on AI, but I think the example given earlier is proof that they didn't either, but they got started, like Kate said. And I think that's very, very important. But many of us and many of the financial institutions have been leveraging foundational machine learning for years via partners. They may not know it, but like CSI and the fraud landscape, and they'll rely on partners like CSI to continue to accelerate the real-time fraud detection with partnerships, with integrations, with better protection. But that doesn't mean that they can't make solo progress, because many FIs have similar priorities, but every FI has unique challenges in the way that they work, in the way that they operate, in the way that they staff. Their talent varies, their processes vary. So they can still make progress even outside of their partner. But it's very fair to be asking the questions of your business partners of how are you helping me? What are you thinking? What is your future? What does that mean for our financial institution from an economic impact standpoint? Because that definitely matters. And it's a very, very valid question.
And I would also add, to bring it back to the very beginning of this conversation, when Kate said that this is an industry agnostic transformation, I think that's also, at least for me, a kind of validating thing where you can see that all these industries are figuring this out. And you can also, even though you have different rules, regulations, et cetera, you can also learn things from other industries, like as they are kind of figuring out how to apply these Gen AI tools.
It's probably like one of the few areas that you can think of, right, when it comes to innovation in banking, that is also impacting everyone's personal life, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about it that way, it kind of helps ground the conversation in like, wow, like this really is bigger than just banking. So certainly we can't stick our heads in the sand, but like maybe we could get really excited about it if we can get comfortable with the risk.
Yeah, Kate, fun fact. So my 13-year-old boy, when he used to want to look up something or ask me a question, he'll say, search it up. And now it is literally GPT is a verb around here. He says, GPT it. I'm like, what did you just say? And that's his browser now. Like when he is looking for something or looking to learn about something on his phone, he pulls up ChatGPT versus Chrome or Google. So it's just a complete dynamic of you're shopping for something and you're on GPT. It's crazy to think, at that age already, that is kind of their baseline. And that will be... Go ahead.
That's also like a good point too. Like for them, this will be Google. So if we think, even further into the future about banking that generation, it's gonna look very different. I mean, we talk all the time about, banking Gen Z and banking younger generations. But if we think even further forward to the generations for which ChatGPT is native, what's that going to look like? I don't have the answer, but I think it's an interesting research question.
Yeah, it's a whole new world. Search engine optimization, marketing, all of that is changing and evolving, and it's exciting. It can be a little scary, to your earlier point, that it's both these things are kind of happening concurrently, but as long as you keep the human in the loop, as long as you're able to like weed out those hallucinations, I think that's key.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely key. I think some of the larger fintech companies have already kind of learned that the hard way, where they've like rushed to release AI-driven or generative AI-driven chatbots. And then there were, Redditors essentially who were able to kind of get the chatbot to hallucinate and say things that it really shouldn't. I mean, they were trying really hard, but still, if you're an actually regulated bank, that just simply can't happen. So,
right.
Well, Kate, this has been amazing. You are obviously deeply researching this space and staying on top of it. So you are always a blast to talk with about what's happening here, what's going to happen, what's real, and what's next. So really appreciate you being on with us. I look forward to seeing you soon in New York City. And Saxon, I'll pass it to you to wrap us up.
Sure. As you said, that's a wrap for this episode of Banking on Community. Another big thank you to Kate Drew from CCG Catalyst for joining us. And thank you all for tuning in. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore in future episodes, let us know on LinkedIn. You can also learn more about who we are and what we do on csiweb.com. Hey, while you're there, check out our content hub. We post new food for thought on banking and banking technology all the time. And you can also find past episodes of this podcast. We'll be back soon. Until then, keep banking on community.